Hey everyone, it's Katie from Moonflower Moments. Today's a bit of a fall vibe list in addition to the decks that I want to bond more deeply with in this fall season. So essentially, I have always been traditionally more of a summer girl. I love when the flowers are at their fullest capacity. I love going hiking. I love going just anything to do with nature, picnics and things like that are definitely my jam. And so fall is traditionally a very difficult season for me because I'm still holding on to the brightness and the light that is summer. And I think that this year I'm just going to have to cope with that by recognizing, like, internally it might feel like things are shifting, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily shifting into a bad place. I tend to hold on to summer much longer than I probably should. And I think that this year I'm going to go full force all in to really embracing what fall can offer me, especially because I'm going through some very deep personal transitional points in my life. I think that fall is a great opportunity for me to lean into that and to recognize that and to express that it's sometimes you have to let things go like the leaves on the trees in order to progress what is meant for you. So I have an insane amount of decks to show today. I'll try to take my time with each of them, but I definitely have a lot of goals for this season, and I have a lot of things that I want to study. I saw someone write that, fall is the season for studying and for cozying up underneath candlelight, and so a lot of these decks I chose with that in mind, like the concept of studying and candlelight, and also the season of harvest as well. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I think that I'll start with the decks that are fall in nature to me in terms of like my green decks and my nature-based decks, because I feel like that is always the core of my practice, and so it's just the best place to start. So I'm going to share with you first Southern Gothic. Y'all have so many decks over here. It's like an insane amount. I hope you're ready for a long video. So this is just a treasure deck in my collection. I am starting to really slip into it. I find that my feelings towards decks really change depending on the season that we're in. And I found that, especially during the fall season, these richer colors really tend to speak to me. I also appreciate that the imagery is more pared back because I do feel like that's embracing the sort of pared back nature that is autumn in its entirety. But this deck gives me a lot of opportunities to do ancestor work on especially on my granny's side. So that would be my dad's mother. She grew up in the South, and her lineage is especially very Southern and very traditionally Southern. And so I like to use this deck for the potential of working with my ancestors in that way. And I feel like that is definitely a practice that's very well suited for fall in general. So a couple more cards, because I know that this one's a pretty popular one. We've all seen it, or many of us have seen it, especially if we live in the South, because it definitely is the Southern Oracle that I can think of. So that was Southern Gothic. All right, next I have one that I thought was going to be more of a spring deck, but when I pulled it out this morning, I was like, oh no, it's right now. This is a great time for it. And this is Mystic Fairies. So I'm about to go to a market later in this afternoon and read for people, and I'm definitely bringing along this deck with me. I think that the way that the yellow tones are depicted throughout this deck definitely reminds me of that seasonal transition between summer and fall, where you look up and you see the sunlight shining through the leaves that are already starting to change colors just a teensy bit. And so I think that especially with the color tones, this kind of like hazy kind of yellow, it reminds me of when the trees are just starting to change color and are starting to dip into those fall palettes. And so right now my cypress trees in my yard are taking on kind of this color right here. It's like this like kind of green yellow. And so I am seeing this color replicated all over my yard. And so this is one of the decks that I'm going to use to continue to help me tap into it. I like that we have here a lot of different fruits. We have apples, which are traditionally harvest, of course, in the fall time. You have like this grain back here, the wicker basket. It feels like home, and this definitely feels more like a harvest-based deck. So I know Mabon, we're kind of moving past that harvest time, but because I do live in a state where the summers are so long for such a long part of the year, I do really feel like this is more reflective of what's around me right now than probably, say, for example, if I lived in Massachusetts, where my husband grew up. And so this is reflecting what's in front of me and allowing me to tap into that fall energy in a way that still keeps me connected to the garden in a very specific capacity, but meets it right where it needs to be. So this was Mystic Fairies. On a similar note, I also have a deck I think is called Secrets of the Mystic Grove. Hold up, let me go check the guidebook. Yes, it is. It's Secrets of the Mystic Grove. I saw this on someone's channel. I can't remember their name off the top of my head, but I'll leave a link in the description box below. And they were talking about fall decks. And I instantly went online to look for this. So I'm not 100% sure if it's out of print or not, but I feel like it is because I couldn't find it anywhere on US Games, like online, but I was able to snag a copy for about $28. So I think it's recently gone out of print. I don't know. If anyone has any more information, please let me know. But I love the way that this replicates what's happening in my life too. These are Iomorphs, and a couple years ago during this time period, we had Iomorphs galore all over my yard. So I think that this like rich red and the rich yellows definitely fits this time of year. But I love this because we're still embracing like the warmth that is summer, but we are stepping into that part of the year where the colors are getting darker, and you can tell like even from this imagery alone that this looks more like the night is coming sooner. And so I like that some of the images are a little bit darker portrayed. We also have like a lot of forest in the background, which definitely reminds me of that kind of fall retreat into darkness. But yet we still have the hints to that fertility and that beauty that is that late summer, early autumn feel. I think she's so beautiful, and the guidebook has been incredibly potent and incredibly true for me. Every time I have read with a guidebook, things that I had written in the journal then became exactly replicated to me almost verbatim in the guidebook. And I've never read the guidebook, like I don't read guidebooks like front to back unless it's one of the decks that I have on this list here. I've done that with, but I don't really do that. I don't really use the guidebook. So I thought it was just an incredible synchronicity that I was able to write a sentence and then immediately I see it replicated back to me in the guidebook. So I think it's just incredibly special and incredibly magical. I love the birds that are in here. Most of the butterflies I can recognize, and so that helps me a lot too because I'm able to pull in, say for example this is a queen butterfly, I'm able to pull in that sort of energy when I'm working within the cards itself. So it really frustrates me when I see people that are creating decks that are nature-based, but they're not basing them on like real creatures. I don't know, that's just like a thing that really bothers me. So I greatly appreciate that every card in this deck is based into a real creature, so that way I can bring that energy in with my background knowledge for myself. So this was Secrets of the Mystic Grove. Okay, and then like what kind of fall list would this be if I didn't, of course, include the Greenwitch Tarot? So this is among my top 5 tarot decks of all time. I'll leave a link in the description box below to that video if you haven't seen it already. And I definitely gush over this deck in this video, and I gush over this deck every time that it comes on my channel. I love this deck. I'm very deeply bonded to this deck. There's a sense of coming home within this one, and you can tell from all the foliage we still have that the fall foliage. So I think that I'm getting the opportunity to really sink into it. These little flowers look like purple asters, which have just started to bloom in my yard. So I'm loving being able to see those similarities between that. But this is a deck that is just incredibly grounded, but rich in a way that is mimicking this space between like late summer and early fall. Like I said, for some people, they probably are transitioning to full on fall right now. We really are just starting to get the touches of it here. And so I think that this is matching what's in front of me at this moment. I love the fact that, like, I call this my little village deck, my little community deck. Everyone really seems to get along and everyone seems to have their own place. And there's something so comforting about embracing that energy at the part of autumn where we're coming back upon into ourselves and we're doing that inward work. It's nice to see that we have that base of people that we can rely on as we are going through some of those inward adventures. So this was Greenwitch. All right, next is going to be my handy dandy Story Through Stones. I'll actually hold these up because they're kind of hard to see because they're so small. This deck is out of print right now, but I think that it's coming back into print. I hope. I'll leave a link in the description box below because I love this creator, Cinderis Quackenbush. Her podcast called The Archetypal Tarot was one of the ways that I first learned how to read tarot, so I desperately value anything that she creates. So these are just stones that were created and they were photographed, and I really appreciate these rich brown and reds and yellows at this time of the year. This is where I really sink into doing a lot of nighttime reading. So when the sun has set around 6 p.m. or 6:30, I'll retreat to my room and I'll light a candle, and it's always so beautiful to still have that grounded stone element with me. While I'm in that deep reflective space, kind of within my office, within my study, and I'm doing that deep and reflective work. I like my practice to always be based in some sort of natural element, and so this always grounds me in just knowing that my feet are firmly planted upon the ground. So I think she's beautiful and I think she's great. And I lean into a lot of intuitive work in the fall as well. And so I like the fact that we have no keywords, we have no guidebook, we have nothing. This is you and your relationship with the cards, and you trusting yourself and giving yourself the opportunity to explore what the world means to you and what you think of the world. You know, I think that is beautiful. Like this is an oracle deck with no training wheels. It is just you and you trusting the messages that are coming through and trusting that higher voice that is speaking to you. And I love this card so much. I've done a lot of work with this card alone. So this is Story Through Stones. All right, next I have my favorite deck in the world, which is Terra Botanical. I did edge it, and I love this deck in black. This is a really affordable indie deck. I think it's less than $40. And it's the first deck that I ever had. It's my favorite deck. I'm just so pleased that like I bonded so deeply with tarot because of this deck. So this is actually my second copy. This is my copy that I use to read for other people because my first copy is way too precious and I don't let anyone touch it. So I had to buy a second copy so that way when I'm reading for other people, I can still access this wisdom and still use it. Fall is the time of coming withinward, right? It is the time of that inward reflection. And so what better deck to do that with other than, you know, the first deck that I ever used. I think that every time I use this deck, I think back to all of the readings that I did with it almost 3 years ago now, because coming in January, I'll have read tarot for 3 years. And all of the progress that has occurred because of this very valuable tool in my life. And so I get very sentimental during this time period, but every time I break out this deck, I want to do the hard work. This is not a deck that I sit down to do just like a daily card pull. I have other decks for this. This is the deck that I go to when I want to do ritual work, when I want to set intentions, when I'm looking at big picture themes in my life, when I just need to know the damn truth about something. And I think that all that work is very well suited for the slowness of fall. The gift that is fall is that we get the opportunity to catch our breath. We get the opportunity to retreat inward. And this deck meets me there when I need the opportunity to do that and I need the space to do that. I've called this my grandmother deck, I think in my top 10 favorite decks video. Specifically because the black and white, it feels like this is a grandmother that's trying to fix you a cup of tea and is willing to listen to your sorrows, but she wants to support you in a way that is so loving. She's telling you exactly and very straightforwardly that you are the one that has all of the power. She's here to help you, but you're the one that can do it, and you have to be the one to do the work. So I could go on and on and on about it, but Terra Botanical is always a deck that comes out in the fall for me. It keeps me connected to my nature-based practices, but it also meets with the fact that, you know, sometimes at this part of the year, the plants are dying off, but that's okay. The spirit is still there. What I learned from them is still there. Just like this black and white imagery, the imprints that they've left on me and the etches that they've left on me and the impressions that I've gotten from them, they're still there and they're still able for me to access, even if they're not in full bloom anymore. So this was Terra. All right, next is, I think, going to be my last super nature one, and that's going to be the Crow Tarot. We just like them for this time of year, y'all. Like the parchment-y kind of border really does remind me of kind of settling in. When I think about fall, I think of working with old papers and fountain pens and retreating to a library collection. And so I like that this border is a little bit tea stained in that kind of way. It reminds me of that real academic side of things. The crows and I used to hate each other, and then all of a sudden our relationship just completely shifted. And now the crows like to tell me very brutally and very honestly about the big picture things in my life. And I think that fall is a great time to contemplate those larger themes, because once again, we've slowed down enough and we've caught our breath enough. We've done most of the work during the spring and the fall. Now it's time for us to assess and reassess and consider, what are we going to focus on as we finish out the seasonal year? What are we going to carry with us into winter? And what are we going to let go? What are we going to let die off in that natural way? So the crows are my little honest advisors. This is definitely a King of Swords deck for me in every way. This deck just is King of Swords, and there's nothing else like it that I own. I also have said this before, but I appreciate the botanical touches that are in this deck. I get a lot from this deck when I just slow down and I allow myself to look at the plants that are in it. Like, of course, Temperance always has the irises. I did the Temperance card with Binny a couple weeks ago, so that'll be on his channel in a few weeks, and I'll put it in the description box below once it's up. But I spent a lot of time talking about the irises, so that's always in there. But I love the fact that this creator, that Cullinan, has decided to put those irises front and center. So we're still, we're kind of separate. We're kind of removed. We're not in the thick of the garden right now, but we still have these touches, kind of like Terra Botanical, that's allowing us to stay present within the practice of just seeing the beauty and the wisdom and learning continually from those plant allies. So that was my last deck in terms of nature-based things. I want to go into the decks that are fitting in other ways seasonally right now. So I'm going to start with the decks that I've used lots, because like I said, all the nature decks I've used lots because that's a bulk of my practice. So I'm going to start with this second section, which is more like historical and more like decks that require study, the ones that I've used lots, and then I'm going to go into the ones that I want to work with more during this season. So the one that I've worked with, I think, the most out of this section, which definitely feels autumny for me, autumnal, is going to be the Little Wizards deck by Push Kitty. So I use this deck a lot. I think I've spoken about this a lot recently on my channel because I tend to use this deck in August and September as I'm starting school. I like to use this deck as my daily pool deck because it depicts a school. I'm a teacher. It just kind of works. But more importantly than that, you know, it reminds me of all of the times where I've cozied up with a Harry Potter book. I tend to do a reread of Harry Potter in the fall months, so I'm probably going to pick up Philosopher's Stone very soon. And then I'll move into Chamber of Secrets, which, of course, if you've read Harry Potter, the Death Day Party, where they're celebrating the death of Sir Nicholas Flamel, not Fennel. Oh my God, wrong character. Nearly Headless Nick. They get together and it's just a bunch of ghosts that are celebrating the death of someone. And it is the most perfect October description of all time. Like the way they describe like pumpkin soup and the chill in the air. It's just perfectly atmospheric. And so this deck always and continually reminds me of that time of year. It's a deck that makes me happy. It's a deck that, though it's a fandom deck, I feel like it can handle some pretty tough questions. I've read for some situations that have happened at school in regards to like students, like I'm trying to get advice on what to say to them or how to interact with them in particular ways. And this deck has given me a lot of insight to them. And so I like it. It allows me to be connected to that youthful sense of past, and that cozy kind of nostalgic sense of past, but it also helps me to lean into the cozier months of crawling up on my reading chair with a massive crochet blanket and my cats and my dog, all three of them on my lap, and reading Harry Potter. So that is Little Wizards. On a similar vein, I've also used Literary Witches quite a bit. So I have written on these cards, and so I want to use this deck more. This is a deck that was one of my first Oracle decks, so I used to use it all the time consistently. But then I found out that this deck is counterfeit. Like I said, it was like my third deck that I ever bought. And so I just completely stopped using it like that. But I also am like really disgusted by the fact that it's a counterfeit deck. So I'm still trying to work my way through this. I think by the end of the season, I probably will just have bought a brand new copy, because I think the deck is so valuable and so wonderful, but it's the fact that I know that this is not authentic, and I don't buy counterfeit decks. That's something that I just don't do. I bought it by accident. I didn't know any better when I was first starting. And so I think it's time to repurchase this and rebuy it, because it is just so perfect, guys. It is so perfect for this time of year. I am an English teacher, and so I am very well acquainted with a lot of the classics that are depicted here. And honestly, there's a sense of nostalgia with that, because we are starting to move away from some of these classic novels in favor of like more modern ones within the classroom. And I think that's totally fine, because we need to see that our kids need to have a connection to literature. But I think that there is something so eternally beautiful about some of these classics and the themes that they portray. And you know, the thing about literature is that it's meant to help you feel connected with people throughout time. It's meant to show you that you're not alone. And so I definitely want to dip my toes back into some classics while I'm here, even if it means that I'm just reading some of the short stories that are depicted in this. I want to do that. You know, I don't have to, go knee deep into a novel, because I really honestly haven't been in a big reading space this year. I've definitely reduced the amount of reading that I usually do. But like Emily Dickinson, if I pull this up with the soul, I could absolutely find a poem from her to sit and to enjoy and to contemplate. Zora Neale Hurston, I mean, of course she wrote like Their Eyes Were Watching God, but she also wrote a bunch of short stories too. And so I want to reconnect with this deck in this time period. Toni Morrison is one of my queens. Like, actually, as a matter of fact, Toni Morrison is the queen of my life. She is my favorite writer of all time when it comes to classic literature. So it's time for me to step back into that space where I'm reading beloved, and I'm reading other really heavy works. The fall is the time for contemplation, and so I want to use this deck to bring me back to that space where I'm studying and reading things and analyzing and taking that time for inward reflection as well. So this was Lit Witches. All right, and then a major deck that's on my study list. If I'm gonna like formally study a deck this fall, I want it to be this one. This is Influence of Angels, and this guidebook is insanely good. I'll show you a couple pages in just a second. So I really do tend to lean into like Christian imagery when it comes to the fall. I don't know why. I think it's something about like all of the gold tones and just like the historical beauty that's oftentimes depicted in like Catholic churches, which I grew up Catholic, so that makes sense. But it feels like autumn time for me. It feels like Thanksgiving time. I don't know. This definitely feels like it's this time of year. So I enjoy working with decks that look like this. But the guidebook in particular is definitely one that I think you have to take your time with it. It's a very small guidebook. You really can read this deck straight out of the box. It's not something that you have to study, but because this deck is based so heavily in numerology, and I think it's like the most clearest depictions of numerology I've ever seen, I want to lean into this and use this deck to deepen my understanding of that in general. So I have some pretty big plans with this one right now. It's on this luscious, excellent, delicious linen cardstock. And when we're talking about like autumn, I also kind of think of like the coziness of just kind of like wrapping yourself in blankets and the tactile experience of what autumn is. And so this linen cardstock definitely relates to that as well. So I'll show you the guidebook real quick. Just a page or two. So this is the entry for the Six of Cups, and it has like the sixes are about returning to a state of harmony and balance. It goes through all of the symbols that are on the card. It then talks about the direct meaning and the shadow meaning. And so there's not a lot of guidebook here. Also, we have an angelic meaning too. There's not a lot for each card, it's only maybe 2 pages max. But God, it's so good. And I found that every time I work with a guidebook, my message is just nuanced with a lot of like subtle layers that are just really beautiful to dip my toes into in this time of the year where I can process that. So that was Influence of Angels. All right, next is going to be Witch Sisters. I have not worked with this deck the way that I want to work with this deck, guys. I pre-ordered this deck and I was so excited about it. I talked about it for months. I followed the creation of this deck on Instagram, but then I got it in my hands and there has been that disconnect. I think that this deck is meant for me right now in my life. I'm exploring a lot of themes around like community and friendship, and especially sisterhood in my life right now. I'm stepping into my Saturn return very, very, very soon. And so I'm starting to feel kind of nudges of areas where I can grow personally. And I think that it is embracing sisterhood. And so I want to use the Witch Sisters to help me along that journey this fall. I think that there is a sense of simultaneous warmth along with coldness to this deck. There's something that's stark about it that really reminds me of like fall, where everything has been pared back. I think that this is a great depiction of like more like fall, because we have like this trees, but you can tell that the leaves are definitely dying off. But like what's left when everything has faded are these creatures and then these women. And you can tell that this is a sisterhood of women by the way that the artist very carefully depicted all of them to have their own personalities and their own souls. The guidebook talks about the different myths and folkloric legends that surround some of these women, because they are based in that long lineage of tradition. And I think, so I like this because, you know, I can, if I pull this card, I know that this one is, I don't remember who it is, but I remember in the guidebook that this is connected to a specific figure. And so I can do more work with this figure in general. And I think that the time to do that is now in the fall, when I am going inward and I'm spending a lot more time in my office, a lot less time outside. And so I want to embrace these women in this season of my life and just see what there is for this deck to teach me. So this is Witch Sisters. All right, next we have the beloved Barbara Walker. She's intense, my friends. She's intense. But I always bring her out in the fall. I bought her in October of last year, and she and I bonded really well during that time period. Of course, this definitely is giving more like October than it is September because of the colors. We have a lot of blacks, we have a lot of oranges. This definitely does feel very stark in its approach and very blunt in its approach. But I like this deck quite a bit. I like this deck a lot. I like that the guidebook just gives you little nuggets of like these court cards and who like these people are. So similar to the Witch Sisters, I can take the time to do a little bit of a deep dive into these figures if I pull cards that represent them. And I think that that's one of the spaces that I want to be in this fall. I definitely want to study. I definitely want to learn. I want to apply myself. I think earlier in my tarot learning journey, I was growing exponentially because I was thinking about tarot, I was reading tarot, I was writing about tarot, I was doing everything tarot so much. And now I'm doing that, but I'm not really learning as much because I'm practicing. And there is learning that comes from the practice itself. But I think that stepping back to my roots, which was a lot of very deep studying about the tarot, is going to be something that's only going to expand my worldview and definitely deepen my relationship with the cards. So this was Barbara Walker. Y'all think of me as I work with her because she's very mean to me. She's very mean to me. And not to personify my decks, but that is exactly what we do here. Barbara Walker is very mean. Maybe I'll pull cards this year that depict something different, but so far she's always been very mean. But hey, I might need that kick in the ass. All right, next has to be Tarot Vampyres. My husband did edge it in this gorgeous red for me. He did such a good job. It was so nice of him. I edged a deck and he edged this one with me, and it was just a nice little date together. So Tarot Vampyres I have formally studied before. I got through all of the court cards, but I never read the guidebook for the majors. So I would like to dip back into it because I think it's the time of the year for it. I'm ready to learn more for it. Obviously, this is more like spooky season than like fall in general. but I don't have a lot of like spooky season decks because, like I said, most of my practice is nature based. And so I'm throwing this all together and just calling it a big like fall, kind of fall playlist for decks. But I'm positive that there are some people out here that are leaning into this very heavy October energy right now. This deck is a Scorpio, but I can totally imagine that some people have already pulled this out and have been using it for a couple weeks. And there are people that use it all year, you know? Not every one of us uses our decks seasonally, and I definitely respect that. So Tarot Vampyres, my goal for this kind of fall season is to read the majors, because I got so much out of working out with the court cards. I think that the guidebook really is, people cannot say it enough how good it is. And so I'm not trying to hype up an out of print deck, but I think it's worth the hype. Personally, I definitely think it's worth the hype. So I created like a little notebook when I was studying the minors, and I sometimes reference that notebook and its interpretations of the astrological associations when I'm reading with other decks. So like the quote unquote guidebook that I created for this deck is universal in that way, because I just find it to be so comprehensive and just very accessible ways to understand tarot from a deeper, more esoteric lens. So if you're interested in the esoterica of tarot, I couldn't recommend this deck enough. I enjoy it. So that is Tarot Vampyres right there. I know, I definitely like just wanted to show off that edge job again so I could see it in my camera. She's pretty. Okay, so pivoting to the last deck that I want to do some really heavy studying with. I don't know, guys. Fall is a study time for me. I want to bring back my Tabula Mundy. At one point in my life, Tabula Mundy was among the top 10 favorite decks in my collection. And it's not anymore, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be. But I would really like to bring it back. I used to use this deck in combination with Serpent and Peacock, which I'm about to show next. And I would pull Serpent and Peacock for the top, and I would have this for the bottom layer because it is a Thoth-based deck, so it does have keywords. So it made Serpent and Peacock's kooky imagery a lot more accessible for me. But I used to use this deck constantly, and then I somehow got it in my head that I was like, well, I don't really know Thoth, so like maybe I shouldn't be using this deck, especially reading for other people. And while that's totally 1000% true, I definitely think that I got in my head about, oh, well, if I don't use Thoth, like, can I actually get good readings from this? And that's actually not what I think of at all. Like, I think if you know tarot from a basic point of view, if you know one system, there are some similarities amongst them to where you can fill in the gaps for yourself. That doesn't mean that you should go out and use this deck in a position where other people are paying you. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. You know, you should work with the system you're most comfortable with when you're receiving money from other people, without a doubt, for sure. But like in terms of reading for myself at home, I don't know why I got into this thought of, well, because you don't know all of the nuances of Thoth, like you're not going to be able to get a good reading from it. Because I was getting good readings from this for months before that little persnickety little idea came into my head. So I got to strip that back. I need to do some journaling about it. I needed to do some work with this deck and just remind myself like, wow, I freaking love it. I lusted after this deck, guys, for probably close to about, I would say probably close to a year. But because of the price, I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And then finally I was like, you know what? If this goes out of print before I buy it, I will regret it. And so I did. I bought it. And I don't regret buying it. I still sometimes use it, but I want to get back to that place where I love it. And if that means that I need to do a formal study and dip my toes into the guidebook that came along with this one, even though it's way over my head, taking it one card at a time, then I'll do that. You know, I don't want to be in a place where I feel like I have to study my decks to use them, because I think that I am bringing enough to the table to where I can get some kind of reading from it. But whatever I need to do to get back on board with this deck, I want to. And so anyway, I think that it naturally does speak to the fall aspect because of the studying of it, but I think the colors too. I really am drawn to very rich colors at this time of the year, something that makes me feel still so intensely deep, because as the world is turning darker around me, I need this bright punch of colors in the gut to remind me that there's still so much color around me. I'm a color-driven individual, and so when I see images that like this that are oversaturated, it helps get me through those darker months. And it's an intense deck, so I think it definitely matches the intensity that we can feel after the that strong, intense, deep, reflective study. This one might be more of like a Scorpio deck, but it fits. It's definitely a fall deck still. All right, guys, now we have Serpent and Peacock. I want to fall in love with this deck again. For the longest time when I started my channel, this was like almost my favorite deck of all time. And then in my top 10s video, it kind of slipped to number 3. And if I'm honest with myself, I don't know if it's even in the top 10 anymore. I don't know about that. But I freaking love this deck so much. I love how kooky it is. I love how weird it is. I love how I can approach this deck and it gives me an answer that makes me question more things. It's not straightforward. It wants you to do the work. It's not going to do the work for you. And I like that. I think that this is a deck that I want to use more in the fall because of the way that it does require that work. This is not a deck that I just throw down some cards and call it a day, because the imagery is so kooky. I mean, look at that devil. You can really sink into this image for quite some time to be able to assess what the hell is going on here. And I love that. And I really do love this deck. So maybe it still is on the top 10, but I don't know. My practice has been shifting away from this. I think I have like gone to more like quick, fast readings than some of these deeper readings. And that might just be the reflective part that I'm in my life. But I want to come back to it. And this deck definitely reminds me of another deck that I'm about to show in the sense that it feels like we are sitting in a library with these old transcripts, because all of these are images from old manuscripts and transcripts. And I like that for this time of the year. That sense of studying, that sense of dipping into the archives. I'm also teaching British literature this year. And so I feel like I should technically be using this deck more. I mean, every day I'm absorbed in the worlds of knights and feudal lords and kings and the church. And so it does reflect what I'm dealing with and the themes that I'm dealing with on an everyday basis, but I just haven't grabbed it as much. So we'll see. This is definitely on my immediate fall list because look at this cat. I mean, look at this cat. Like, I don't understand what's going on in this Seven of Swords, but I am so damn down for the ride to listen to whatever this cat has to tell me, this little mischievous little thing. And look at these cats. I mean, who doesn't love a medieval cat? So we'll get there. Maybe she still is on the top 10. I don't know. It's funny how a video you made like literally like 2 months ago can become obsolete because our practices shift and they change and they move. And that's okay. So that was Serpent and Peacock. And I even have it like in the metal box. I don't know. I do love this deck. I'm going to be thinking for a long time today if it's on top 10 or not. Maybe it just hasn't been the time of the year for me to use it. All right, next up is going to be my Chromata Emblemata. We love this deck. This deck and I are getting along so great right now. I'm bringing it today actually to my tarot market. So this is similar to the other vibes that I brought up in like Serpent and Peacock and perhaps Influence of Angels. I like working with imagery that's just a little bit older at this time of year. It just fits. Historical decks I think are meant for the fall season, and that's a hill that I would die on. But this is just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful images. And I love the little phrases that go along with them. I found that this is a really great reader for other people, hence why I'm bringing it today to my tarot event. But I like it, guys. It has a great cardstock, very high quality. I have nothing more to say. I love this deck. It is a fall deck. I have been using this deck constantly. Actually, I feel like this should have made it at the beginning part of my video because like I said, I was going to talk about the ones that I've used a lot first, but whatever. This was separate on my desk and I didn't even see it until just now because I have been using it so often it hasn't left my desk. So this is Chromata Emblemata. All right, another cozy deck that I really, really, really want to use is Tarot of St. Petersburg. When I thought about making this video, I thought about picking out the decks that I feel like are just good candlelight readers. And I think that this is such a good candlelight reader. This is a deck that I think wants to be read in the dark after the sun has set. And it's almost like walking into that fantasy world where things are not always what they seem, but you're going to go on this adventure anyway. So this reminds me of reading those fantasy books. One of my favorite things to do during this time of year is to curl up next to the fire or to curl up next to a bunch of candles and just dip my toes into a really long epic fantasy book, especially like Brandon Sanderson. I love reading Brandon Sanderson so much. And though the images on here are definitely like Russian based, so it's more like The Bear and the Nightingale, which is not an epic fantasy, but it is a fantasy book in itself. I definitely think that this fits those times when I'm just sitting down and I want to be lost into a new world and I want to meet these new people and I want to go on these fantasy adventures. Too, I feel like Tarot of the Enchanted Forest would also fit within this space because it does depict that fantasy world, but that's my school deck, so I don't have that with me. So I can't show it, but I feel like it does fit. All right, another deck that reminds me of my literary roots is a Sleepy Hollow Tarot, and I think this one definitely is fall vibes without much explanation. So it depicts upstate New York during the Puritan times, and I really appreciate that because my husband is from Massachusetts. So obviously it's a different geographic area, but I have had the opportunity to visit Salem in October. Now that being said, I visited Salem in October before I was really into tarot or into anything that was witchy. So I definitely regret the fact that I was not able to go to like all the awesome like metaphysical stores and poke into some of the historical locations, but I definitely have been there and appreciated the overall atmosphere at that time of year. And so I wanted a deck to remind me of that, to help me tap into that. I haven't read Sleepy Hollow, like I said, but I definitely have a very extensive reading list for the fall. And so I think that this one might make it on there. But it's just cute. Like, I love all of these little nods. Actually, now that I'm thinking of it, it might not be Puritan Society. It might be Revolutionary War. Maybe? I don't know. I haven't read the book, so feel free to correct me if I'm completely wrong. But it fits, okay? This is a perfect September deck. Without a doubt, perfect September deck. So this was Tarot Sleepy Hollow, and I think it has my favorite backs of all time. So pretty. And the way they shimmer is just gorgeous in the candlelight. All right, and then the last but not least is gonna be my Shakespeare Oracle. We love this deck. So I'm used to teaching English 1, in which we teach Romeo and Juliet, and we always do that in the fall. Well, now because I'm teaching 12th grade English, the play of choice is Hamlet, and we teach that very close to graduation. So I think that that's interesting because usually I am reading Shakespeare in the fall. I feel like Shakespeare's plays are better suited for the fall. So I might want to dip my toes into reading Hamlet now because it is a play that I've never read. I did take a Shakespeare class, but strangely enough, my professor was like, look, we're not going to read Hamlet. We're not going to read Romeo and Juliet. We're not going to read The Tempest because all of you have probably read that before. So we're going to go into some of the more uncommon ones. And I think that's fine. Like, I understand his judgment. He probably has taught like Romeo and Juliet 700 times and was just sick of it. But ultimately, it means that I've never read Hamlet. So I'm an English teacher who has never read one of Shakespeare's like most profound works. So I think that the fall is the time to remedy that, and I'm excited about it. So I'll probably read it a couple times in the fall just to get my feet wet with it, maybe start doing a little bit of light lesson planning and preparation for close to graduation. One of my seniors will be reading it. But I think that this deck is going to naturally be my buddy as we're going through that. I'm going to match my little Hamlet play with my little Shakespeare Oracle and call it a day. So I was able to get this when it was out of print, because it still is out of print, for about $70 because I looked for it off of Thrift Books. I found that Thrift Books and Abe Books usually sells it for much lower than eBay. So if you're on the hunt for this, I definitely wouldn't buy it from eBay. I would wait until one of the secondhand suppliers, such as Thrift Books, post it. I feel like that's the most efficient way to get it. And they do post, I check the price of this deck quite often, and they do post every few months. So just wanted to give that little PSA. Okay, so there are more that I could include, for sure, But I think that these are the ones that are most closely aligned to the fall vibes, what I'm using right now, and then what I want to use in the fall. So I'm going to consider this a little bit like fall deck vibes and also goals for this season. I think it is so exciting to be moving into this new season. I really am starting to see how this can be a good time for me, and recognizing that rest and reflection and study is just as important as all of the busy action and the beauty of summer. So I guess this video is my like so long for now summer video. We are going to move with the seasonal energies and embrace what's here. So I hope all of you have a beautiful day, and I appreciate y'all's support on my channel. Thank you so much for watching.